Hello, the program is Stan the History Man, and I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. Today I want to talk about two other Lincolns, Abraham Lincoln's father and one of Abraham Lincoln's sons. Abraham Lincoln's father, Tom Lincoln, we always think, well, Lincoln was born in a log cabin, so they must have been really dirt poor and all. It's not really true. The kind of the American dream in a way. Tom Lincoln became a successful farmer, and he was actually a elder in the Primitive Baptist Church, and people of that position, even on a frontier like church like that, would have to be people of some kind of substance. He also was photographed. Okay, that was expensive in those days. We actually have one photograph of Abraham Lincoln's father. He also was a cabinet maker. A lot of frontier people were that way, learned that skill because you couldn't just go out and buy them at the cabinets. So he made them, and there are actually there's a chest of drawers and I think couple of chairs actually made by Abraham Lincoln's father. Can you imagine what that would be worth? Okay. Anyway, but they didn't get along at all. Tom Lincoln wanted his son to follow in his footsteps. After all, he was becoming successful, hard work, agriculture, farming. And Lincoln, he just see him sitting under, Tom Lincoln, see Abraham sitting under a tree reading a book of poetry. So I think he thrashed Abraham a couple of times. And so Abraham didn't waste any time, getting out of Dodge. And of course became a successful lawyer. Tom Lincoln died in 1850, and Abraham did not even go to his funeral. He just gave some spiritual bromide about, well, commend your soul to Jesus, and in another better place we will meet again. They didn't go to his funeral, okay? So anyway, now Lincoln himself, of course, went on to become what some people don't really realize, one of the most successful lawyers in America, and also a wealthy man. When he died, he had left an estate of $100,000 roughly, which would be equivalent roughly to $1 million today. Okay, and you see the house in Springfield, that's quite a substantial building, what you'd expect a successful lawyer to live in. Now, Abe's son, his name escaped me, Abraham Lincoln's son. I should have a note on this one. Having a senior moment, perhaps. Robert Lincoln. Okay, Robert Lincoln went to Harvard. Okay, because again, Abe had the money to send him to Harvard, and he, after the war, became very successful. He became what I would say was, just personal opinion, the most wonderful job, the best job in America, and that was the head of the Pullman Company. In those days, if you had a little bit extra money and you were going somewhere any distance, it wasn't a horse and buggy, you took the train. There wasn't a section of this country 25 miles with the sound of a steam locomotive, the whistle, in the 19th century, late 19th century. So people wanted, to sleep. These trains were going overnight. And so George M. Pullman, who was also a cabinet maker, made a pretty fancy passenger carriage that could be converted to bunks at night. And the railroads, it was expensive as a new thing and whatever. But with Lincoln's funeral train, they said, let's send him, Lincoln's body and the family and so on, in this first Pullman car called, fittingly enough, the Pioneer. And they had to rip up the station platforms over much of the route that Lincoln took from Washington to Springfield, so this sleeping car could get through. But it really made everybody said, that's great, we've got to do that too. We really shouldn't have to sit up all night in a day coach. And so it came to pass eventually that Pullman was the only company that had Pullman cars, and what they would rent them to the railroads. They supply them with the bunks, with the bedding, with the personnel, and so they had they were like bunks with curtains for privacy and men and ladies rooms, and it was the way to go. Now, of course, more special. There was private compartments and so on that Pullman also had. We have that today, by the way. Amtrak does have, except there's no Pullman. Pullman went out of business in the 1960s when we were just doing the best we could to destroy the passenger railroads in America. But anyway, Lincoln's son Robert had a gold pass, apparently. All you have to do is flash that on any train in America, and he'd ride for free. So in other words, he could ride at night, the most expensive kind of Pullman car. And so he was very particular about his father's memory, and apparently he did destroy much of all the correspondence he had between from Mrs. Lincoln to President Lincoln, and that historians are still pulling their hair out on that one. But he lived on until 1926, full of riches and honor as Lincoln's son. He became Secretary of War. I think twice, actually, he was Secretary of War and was apparently a very good, he's quite a good businessman. But I think, he had the best job in America. So anyway, two other Lincolns I want to talk about: Lincoln's father, Thomas Lincoln, and Lincoln, his one son that survived in maturity, Robert. The other two sons died earlier, Edward and Tad. Died just diseases at the time, which just shows how awful childhood diseases were, because Lincoln had the money to afford the best doctors at the time, which probably isn't saying an awful lot. And they died, and only one of them lived on to hardly maturity. And then, say, Robert Lincoln was the only one who lived to be an old man and died of old age. Well, that's Stan the History Man. I'm your host, Dr. Stanley Sandler. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you later.